All right, once again, my name is Michael Hacker. I'm a Azure App Dev TSP for Microsoft State and Local Government. And we wanted to welcome you to our SLG Azure's Fridays. And basically what SLG Azure Fridays is about providing you technical information and overview information about our Microsoft Cloud services and solutions. Now, we originally were planning on doing this every 2 weeks and focusing on app dev topics, but we've actually kind of decided to expand that recently. So I want to talk a little bit about that before we actually dive into the DevOps 101 discussion. So first, I want to hit this new SLG Azure Friday series information. So we're going to start doing events every Friday starting on October 6th. And we're going to hold these at this specific time. So they're going to start at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And they're going to be between 30 and 60 minutes long. So this is going to really depend upon the presenter and the topic that they're covering. Now, we're going to start rotating every week to a different topic category. So, of course, this week we're going to be talking about DevOps, which really falls in the Azure App Dev category. But in 2 weeks, when we start this actual new series, on October 6th, we're going to cover another Azure App Dev topic, and that's going to be around continuous integration and continuous deployment using Visual Studio Team Systems to Azure. And then the following week, we're going to have an Azure infrastructure presentation. The week after that, it's going to cover data and AI. And then finally, we're going to do these community events. And the community events are all about you. We want to hear about what you're working on and the types of things that you're doing. And we're going to get some of our customers to maybe present solutions that they've created or that they're working on. And we want to make this a nice, tight-knit community for people to have good conversations. And we're going to continue to repeat this over and over and over every 4 weeks. So once we get done with the community, the following week, of course, we'll be then back to the Azure App Dev. So the idea is that we have this consistent series that you can count on every Friday at 1:30. Now, all the events are going to be listed on the website that you use to register for this event. It's the slgevents.azurewebsites.net site. So always go out there to get the latest information about what's occurring and on what day. I also want to make you aware of our Azure Government newsletter. Now, we put together this newsletter to have some recent announcements about things that are happening in the Azure Government specific environment. A lot of education and training opportunities and information is put in there. And we're also going to include announcements about these SLG Azure Fridays events. So if you want to know specific topics, this is another way to get notified of that. Now, some of you may already be receiving the newsletter. If not, please send me an email. My email address is right there, mhacker@microsoft.com. Just ask to be added to the mailing list for the Azure Government newsletter. Please provide your full name, title, and your organization you work for so I know who I'm speaking with. And I will get you on that list and make sure that you receive these newsletters. And these are monthly newsletters, so we try not to bombard your inbox. We try to be very concise. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brian Spann, who is our presenter for the day. Brian?
Hi, Mike. Thanks. And let me go ahead and get my screen shared out. And we'll get started. Okay, so as Mike stated, today's topic is on lessons learned from our journey to DevOps. So we're going to kind of focus on a DevOps 101, very high level. My name is Brian Spann. I work with Mike as a Azure App Dev TSP for Microsoft. So since 1975, Microsoft has done development in a certain way, the waterfall way. And about 6 years ago, we saw a grave danger appearing on the horizon. So our business was rapidly changing around us, and we had to kind of turn our ship around to survive. So as you may recall, the way software was released, specifically around, let's say, Visual Studio as an example, or even TFS, it took about 2.5 years for releases to come out. And the reason why it took so long was because of the waterfall approach, right? So we had planning, coding, testing, stability, and then it would maybe get released to beta and then kind of go through those cycles. We couldn't find bugs and fix them before it was ever released. So a lot of times releases were sent out with bugs that we knew about, is because we couldn't react to them, right? Customers would tell us in the beta program, hey, we found these things. And then we'd say, well, that's great, but we're just going to have to push those off till the next release because we can't integrate them into what's coming down the pipe, so to speak. So we've kind of changed that. And one of the ways that we've changed that approach is by leveraging DevOps. So it was, and still is, the time of Agile and DevOps. We had to formulate a DevOps strategy for our entire organization. But what is DevOps? It can mean radically different things for different people. For us, DevOps means the merging of two previously isolated life cycles, development and IT operations. So a converged DevOps lifecycle gives us the ability to execute on ideas quickly and iterate on feedback rapidly with minimal friction. And so how do we do that? So we quickly realized that our DevOps transformation will have broad organizational impact. Every DevOps conversation needs to focus on people, processes, and tools equally. Otherwise, the transformation will fail. So our DevOps journey began with the definition of 7 DevOps habits. These habits have been refined over time, and our DevOps habits are broad mindset changes that everybody in our organization has actively embraced and live every day. So our DevOps, But what I want to call out are a few of the practices that are crucial to your DevOps journey. Some of the things that you'll see up here that are very important, as Mike mentioned earlier, continuous integration. So CI is the practice in software engineering of merging of all developer working copies with a shared mainline several times a day. Continuous deployment, or CD as you may hear it, is a software development practice in which every code change goes through the entire pipeline and is put into production automatically, resulting in many production deployments every day. Automated testing is the use of special software, it may be separate from the software being tested, to control the execution of tests and the comparison of actual outcomes with predicted outcomes, right? So test automation can automate some repetitive but necessary task in a formalized testing process that may already be in place, or add additional testing that would be difficult to perform manually. Another key topic you'll see a lot in here is infrastructure as code, or IAC. That is the process of managing and provisioning resources through machine-readable definition files rather than physical hardware configuration or interactive configuration tools. The value of infrastructure as code can be broken down into 3 measurable categories: cost reduction, speed or faster execution, and risk, removing errors and security violations. And then the last one I'd like to call out is just user telemetry, right? So these are just a few of the many practices. So let's go ahead and take a look at each one of these habits individually to kind of get an idea. So flow of customer value refers to an organization's ability to move software from idea or initial idea through creation and validation into the hands of the customers and users without impediments or rework loops. Reduced rework allows teams to focus on delivering more value, and so with shorter cycle times, support increased responsiveness, in turn foster customer and user satisfaction and trust. So the DevOps practices that make up this habit actionable are around the continuous integration, continuous deployment, release management, and automated testing. Our DevOps practices are well documented and easily can be implemented by individual teams. Team automation and alignment. Our main goal is responsiveness. Being responsive relies on flexible scheduling, short iterations, and close team collaboration. So this eliminates wasteful handoffs. Each team has the freedom to self-organize their work with full autonomy. We have multidisciplinary feature teams that work from a common product backlog, delivering work ready to deploy at the end of each sprint. We don't tell our teams how to do their work or what rituals to embrace. All that counts are results. So backlog improvement by learning. So we treat our backlog as a set of hypotheses, which are turned into experiments and for which we collect data. We also constantly engage with stakeholders and track their feedback. And based on the data and feedback, we plan our next move and preserve or pivot depending on which direction we need to go. We have implemented practices that help us collect information from different sources. All of this information helps us continuously keep our backlog in sync with business goals and realignment with sudden changes in the environment. Evidence gathered in production. So good experiments provide actionable data. We measure everything: health, availability, performance, and other quality of service metrics, but also usage, to collect evidence that provide or disproves each backlog hypothesis. We rely heavily on experimentation to fine-tune our products and services. At any point in time, we run hundreds of experiments in production. We then contrast usage data among cohorts, for example, weekday or weekend users. And then we hypothesize ways of improving the experience for each. Managing technical debt. So technical debt are problems that negatively impact flow and progress. Technical debt lowers your productivity, makes code fragile, and causes bugs that create unplanned work. We aim to zero out technical debt in each sprint to limit long-term negative impact. By keeping technical debt down, it starts with high-quality code. We have implemented practices to increase code quality at every individual developer level. After that, we rely heavily on test automation. Every team has a goal of reducing technical debt to zero in each iteration. Production first mindset. So production lies at the heart of our software delivery organization. Production is every team member's #1 job in every role, not just IT operations. We continuously track live site status, immediately remediate any live site issues, and proactively identify our outliers in performance. We don't use pre-production environments. We deploy directly to production in each iteration. We have implemented DevOps practices that enable us to recover quickly, facilitate root cause analysis of issues, and an architecture that fails gracefully with minimal impact. So infrastructure as a flexible resource. We use the flexibility infrastructure of the public cloud and continually improve our architecture to refactor into dependent, discrete services. Cloud infrastructure provides scale on demand and makes it easy to stand up services for continuous feedback from constant usage. Cloud infrastructure allows us to provision infinite resources on demand, something that is impossible with traditional on-premises infrastructure. This has enabled us to implement many innovative DevOps practices while with minimal capital outlay. So software development has changed. Old prerogatives and priorities have shifted, and every software delivery organization must address these changes in order to survive. It's important to understand that our DevOps journey or transformation just like our Agile transformation, has been a journey and not a jump. Our recommendation is to take a look at implementing or improving DevOps practices regardless of your tool or product selection. Here are a few steps that you can take away from what you've learned based on our journey so far. Shift from traditional dev and ops roles and accountabilities, right? So begin a DevOps journey inside your organization requires a systems thinking, analyzing the most efficient way to deliver value to your customers across all people involved, from software ideation to production and back. This likely will result in change in the structure of your team, responsibilities, and culture across dev, ops, and the business. Shared metrics for team structure should be implemented to help measure progress and encourage a positive culture shift. So automation should be considered and pursued across all areas of software lifecycle, especially if the organization is planning on making changes to roles and accountabilities. Manual efforts, especially in the spaces of testing, environmental creation, and release management, can significantly delay delivering value to customers. And the sprint needs to be done. So moving to a world where you are shipping after every sprint into production instead of having a potential shippable increment means focusing on making sure that as the sprint closes out, it really is done and ready to deploy immediately. Building on what we've implemented from our Agile methodologies, we want to make sure that each new build is immediately available to customers so that we can make the feedback loop much faster so that we can in turn build the right product. And then implementing telemetry and analytics. Telemetry and analytics, you gather, are the lifeblood of running your service, right? Developing a box product to running a service and implementing DevOps practices has shown us that collecting telemetry has been crucial. Additionally, we need to make sure we are building the right product for our customers. We need to make sure we are gathering data around whichever experiments or hypothesis we're testing at any given time for those experiments that we're building. So the question is not if it will hit you. The question is when. Are you ready for DevOps? If you'd like to learn more about our DevOps journey, please visit the links mentioned here. I'll give you a second to write those down. And with that, I would thank you for your time, and we'll open it up for questions, Q&A.
Hey, Brian, actually a couple quick things that I think would be interesting to kind of share. So, you know, here at Microsoft, switching to the DevOps model was kind of a culture shift, a big culture shift. Where, like you said, traditionally we did waterfall, long planning cycles, long development, and then finally deployment cycles, where we were talking, what, 3 years, sometimes even longer between product releases.
Yeah, and I think on my slide, I think we averaged it out, you know, to 2.5.
Yep. And so now with this switch, the idea is let's get value in the hands of the end users faster, but we also have to be very careful to make sure that we're doing that in a very smart way. And that's where, like you brought the testing, the unit testing, and putting testing responsibilities on the developer is a big deal. The other thing that I think is rather interesting about the whole DevOps way of looking at things is, well, actually two things. One is the telemetry. It's kind of funny, you know, developers been doing telemetry for quite a long time, which was usually if an error happened, write it to a log, and then go back and try to figure out what happened, and then we'll fix it in our next cycle. Now telemetry is we're actually tracking every little piece of operation, function, etc. within an application from a timing perspective. So we're not just looking at did an error occur, but how many times does a specific function hit? How long does it take? And all of that data then, like you mentioned, is what gets rolled back into the plan and kind of that actionable feedback back to the backlog.
Correct.
So I find that fascinating. The other thing that's very interesting too is the infrastructure as code, and a lot of people are just now experiencing that as they're moving to the cloud for some of their applications. So, for example, you know, I know we didn't talk about any products throughout this, which was good because it's more of a concept than it is talking about products. But if we talk about our Visual Studio Team system and being able to implement a full cycle, a DevOps cycle, where the developer is building code based on information that was put into the backlog and tasks assigned to them. They're completing those tasks, checking in their code for those tasks. Builds are occurring, tests happen. If builds fail, then we have actionable feedback there, of course, back to the developers. But if they're successful, then they can go into that deployment phase. And that's where this concept of infrastructure as code comes into play, because you may have it go directly into production, which is one option, or you may have this go to another environment that gets built every time a new build gets created. So a new build finishes, we're using this infrastructure as a code concept to go out and build that new environment, and boom, deploy the code.
Yeah, and the reason why we have that, the reason why that's important, right, is to understand that when we deploy code as a developer into an infrastructure that we do not have control over, or even if we do have control over, more than likely there's been shifts in the technology outside of our purview, right? And so when we go to deploy that software, we either, we don't know what version of the OS we're currently on, based on patching, or what software has been introduced since the last time we deployed there. And having infrastructure as code, basically allowing us to level set before that code's actually dropped onto that service or that machine, we're at an advantage of knowing that it's going to work because it has worked in the past, and it is a known set of configuration that we know that we can control. And so that is one of the main reasons why we look at infrastructure as code as part of your continuous deployment, because that just gives the developers and operations folks, for that matter, a sense of safety, knowing that they're not going to get called every time that that we need to deploy a release, or even slowing down those releases, right? Because if it's automated, we may still have some checks to say, hey, I'm going to approve that, but at the end of the day, they know that once it's approved, it's going to go in, and then tests can commence, or verification that everything's running happens at that step, and then it moves on to the next piece of the pipeline.
Absolutely. And one thing too, I think to be clear on that, is infrastructure as code. That can mean many different things. So when we say infrastructure as code, it might actually be code. It could be PowerShell. It could be JSON. It could be, just a set of steps, right?
Yeah, it could even be Bash. It could be Puppet or Chef. I think we even, Ansible. There are some of the other ones out there. So it can be a whole host of those things.
So, I think the important thing is like you mentioned, DevOps is more than tools. It's more than technology. It's people, processes, and tools. And it doesn't really necessarily matter the tool that you're using. It's just making sure that you're using the tool for specific components. Yeah, people, processes, and tools right there. So, I think the bigger part of this is the process. People is important. Tools are really important. But I think the process is really important in DevOps. And, a couple other things that hit me when I think through some of this stuff is automate. If you're doing anything manual, you're doing it wrong. And the reason why is because if you're doing it manual, you're going to make a mistake. And you're going to think that things are going wrong, and you might reintroduce wrong information back into your DevOps loop, and you might make an incorrect assumption that causes more problems. So having things automated in a very standardized format, I think is critical.
Yeah, and I would say that most people that you talk to, when they talk about a DevOps conversion, right, or adopting a DevOps mentality, will tell you, CI/CD, and that is heavily involved around automation, as you stated. Automation is the key to basically reducing human error and eliminating waste. And as you see it as a main point in the process side of the house there. But all three of these have to kind of exist together to actually have that DevOps transformation. If you're missing one of these, chances are you're not going to be successful. So you definitely need to embrace all three areas of this and kind of talk it out, work your way through it. And again, there's not a silver bullet, right? We can't give you a silver bullet and say, hey, tomorrow you're a DevOps team. It's an evolution. We went through this, again, as I stated, 7 years ago, and I wouldn't say that we adopted it or gotten to the point that we are today immediately. I think it took a couple of years to get there. But just to kind of point in case, 90% of all the Microsoft engineering teams are all in our DevOps products and use it.
So one of the things too that you mentioned is we frequently, and I believe pretty much with almost all of our cloud services at least, we deploy to production. And we do that on a very frequent basis. And this is kind of an interesting thing. And everybody that's here today, think through, how long does it take you from the moment that you start a process to the time that, or have an idea for a solution or a enhancement to the time that you deliver? Think about that time scale. Think how you can compress that down, and how can you deliver results faster by using these DevOps practices. Because it's really interesting that if you look at the major cloud providers out there, and I'm not talking about cloud providers from an Azure perspective or AWS or Google or something like that. What I'm talking about is like software as a service, Office 365, those types of services, Twitter, Facebook even. They're actually deploying into production sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of times a day. So it's very, very interesting that large dev shops have gotten this DevOps practice down so tight that they feel comfortable that when their developers check in the code, that it can kick off, run all the tests, go through everything, and they've got all of the tools and processes in place that they're confident that when it gets done and they've got a successful build, it can be deployed. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
Yes.
So with that, Brian, I want to thank you for doing this. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the IM window. We've got a couple minutes left here. Just to know where this is going to tailor to, our next webcast event will be in 2 weeks, and we're actually going to dive a little bit into that CI/CD pipeline by creating a web app. It's going to be very basic. We've got a limited amount of time, so we're going to create a basic web app, and then we're going to check that into source control. We're going to see how the continuous integration works and that pipeline works, and then we're also going to see how that continuous deployment works for pushing that out. Chris, yes, absolutely. Brian, could you jump to that last slide where the URL was so they can see that
Sure.
quick?
Yeah, let me slide over there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely keep an eye on our SLG events website that we put out there earlier. So slgevents.azurewebsites.net. In fact, I'll put it here in the window. Please definitely keep an eye out there. Like I said, in 2 weeks, we've got the next event. And then following that, we're going to be doing this on a weekly basis. So, keep an eye out there. Definitely going to have lots of good content across app dev, infrastructure, data, and AI. I think that's some really exciting stuff. And then, of course, we'd like to have you guys participate in some community events. There's my email address. Feel free to email me if you have any ideas, content that you'd like to see, whether it's in the newsletter or whether it's through these webcasts. Please let us know. And I guess we'll just kind of wrap it up. Brian, thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate your time today, and I'd like to thank everybody for attending. We will be sending out a follow-up email to everybody once we have our on-demand recording put in place. So just be aware of that we will send that out so you can share it with your team members. So once again, thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.